Another data source that we could use here for importing data is through APIs. APIs are generally services that are hosted or developed by some organization that is trying to share some of their information via the means of an application programming interface, something that you can interface with, send requests to, and they will send it back to you. It adds a layer of security as well, because they can impose certain authorization or certain permissions for every account. Now, there are multiple libraries that you could use for something like this. The one that I'm going to be demoing today is probably the most popular one, which is the requests library. What I'm going to do first here is I'm going to download that package. So pip env install requests. And essentially the premise of all what we're going to be doing is something that looks like this. You import the requests library. This is the markdown. Let me change that to a Python cell. You import the requests library. You save your data by you call requests dot get, and you pass the URL of the resource that you're trying to retrieve here. Already have that. This is just an example for what you'd use the request library to get, and this is basically just a very simple web page. Once you have the data, I actually can print data dot the text, and if I run this cell here, I get back essentially a text representation of that page that we were just on. This is just to show you that you could get any HTML page or send any request. Now, depending on the particular library that you're, the particular API that you're going to be interfacing with, you may need to provide some extra information, some things like the authorization key, the application key, or the certain data set that you're trying to retrieve. In this demo, I'm going to show you how you could do that with the US Census data. And they do have a developer API that you can send requests to and get data from. Now, there is plenty of APIs that are available to you through the United States Census Bureau here. And these are just some of the APIs that they have made available. So there are ones on the American Community Surveys, and you can actually see the years of those surveys, and you can find the one that you're most interested in for your analysis project from there. Depending on the particular API provider that you're trying to interface with, you may need to provide some extra information or some extra data for example, what data set you're trying to get or what year you're trying to get it for. And if it's a huge data sets like the ones we're going to be requesting through the census, you may need to provide the particular columns of this data set that you're interested in retrieving. Also, some APIs may require that you have to register with them first, generate an API token or some key that will authenticate your request. They generally do that to prevent somebody from trying to perform a DDoS attack or a denial of service attack by sending a lot of requests that will basically bring down the API or the server that's hosting the API. So over here, now we've already imported the request. Let me actually remove everything that I have here and let's rerun it so we have a clean cell. Now, generally the URL that we're gonna Now the URL that we'll be using to hit the Census Bureau website is gonna usually look something like this, which starts with the link to their data API, and then the year of the data set that you're trying to import, and the name of the data set that you're trying to retrieve. I've already done my homework essentially, and I found these are the ones that I'm interested in retrieving right now. Depending on your project, you may do different data sets, different years, so on and so forth. Now, just because I want to make this into something that I can easily change later on as my needs for this API change, I'm just gonna put them in different variables essentially. So I'm gonna have a URL, and I'm just gonna call this the host. So the host in this particular case would be this part here. The year of the data is 2022. The data set that I'm interested in is the CPS basic APR. and I'm just gonna put it like that. Let me actually put this in a string as well because I'm gonna be using it as a string. Now let's construct a URL or something that looks like this a little bit dynamically, again, so that later on if I want to change my needs, all I need to do is change those two variables and everything else in my code should still behave correctly. So I'm gonna create my URL, and that will equal, I'm gonna use the join function, the string join function, to basically combine these three variables here using the slash. So there's a slash separator between each of those variables here. So to do that, you do slash dot join, and then you provide an array of the things that you need to combine. So in this particular case, I am combining my host with the year, with the dataset name, and now if I try to print that URL, I should get the same URL that I was expecting here. Now that I have the URL, the next step here is to compose the request that I need to send to the API. Now, going through their documentation, and I'm posting links to their documentation in the course website and as well as Canvas, you'll see that there are certain elements or certain data information that you need to send in your request. The first being, do you want this data for all states or for a particular state? And the other is, what variables do you need to get from this data set? Now, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to create a dictionary, and I'm going to call this the predicates. And in that, I am going to provide my two parameters that I need to send, which is the get and the for. The for is where you provide what states do you want this data for, and the get is what variables do you want from this data set. So I'm gonna do predicates. For my get, I need the following variables. I'm gonna do something similar to what I've done here, so I'm gonna do join on using the comma. So the things that I need to join is basically the variables that I need, and I already have it somewhere here, so I'll just paste it. Here are the variables that I want to get from this data set, and the second predicate here is the for, and this here just equals state colon star, give me all the states for this data set here. And finally, now I am able to go ahead and compose the request itself to the Census API. So what I will do is, here's my response is going to equal requests dot get. I will provide the URL, and the second thing here is my parameters, and this will equal my predicates dictionary. Let's see what that response actually look like. So I'm gonna print that response, and let's run it. The first thing that came over here was basically the URL that we were trying to print, so let's take that out. And looks like the response is basically some data structure named response, and we got 200 bytes of that, or 200, I don't know what that 200 is honestly. But anyway, that means that it is not in a readily consumable format. I'm pretty sure what I need to do here is to call the JSON function of that data structure that we received, and that will show us the JSON data of what we've just requested. So it looks like we got some data in a pretty interesting data format. So it looks like it's an array of arrays. So the first item in that array is basically my headers, and the second would be the row number 1, row number 2, so on and so forth. Also looks like the state here is coming as a numerical value, and we'll find out how we can get what those states are via another request to the Census API here. So let's now create my census data. This will equal PD, which that means I need to import pandas as PD. And over here, this is going to be a data frame from records. So I'm going to need to provide the records over here. Now, the first thing that you provide for this function is your data obviously. So this is going to be response.json, and because we've already printed it, let me actually remove all this. Let's just expand the screen a little bit. Because we've already looked at what the data looks like, I know that I'm not looking for all the rows. I need to skip that first row. So what I'm gonna need to do here is to basically ask for all the records starting index number 1, which would be the second item here. And the second thing I need to provide for my from records function is the columns name, which would be the very first item in that response here. So my columns would equal this, except that I'm gonna be explicit and I want my first index here, or my 0 index here. Let's actually confirm that that did what we want. So let me do census data.head, and let's only get 5 records here. If I run this, we get, oh, well, first I'm gonna get the JSON, so let me go back and remove this print here. And let's run the cell one more time. So it sends the request, gets the data. Now I have a data frame that basically has my headers as the headers we received from the API response, and then the rest of the rows over here. Now I'll show you how you can actually get those states here, and I found another data set through their documentation that basically was providing what those state names are. I'm just gonna copy it and paste it. I've already created it, and it's also on the course notes. This is another data set from a different year with a different data set that basically will respond back with all the states and their names. So let me actually print that. So this is what the data set looks like. You get the column name and you get a state ID next to it. So what if I, for example, want to get what is the state code for the state of Ohio here? So I'm gonna do some Pandas filtering here. So I'm gonna do states, and I want to get states where the name, and this is uppercase, equal Ohio. And if I print that, let's see, what did I do wrong here? Oh, I forgot to close this here. So what I'm trying to do essentially is I'm trying to get the index, or I'm trying to do a bit of a search for all the states where the state name equals Ohio, and whatever the ID, or whatever the row where this predicate here evaluates to true, is what I want to return back from the states array, or the states data frame. So if I run this here, I get this record. So at the index of 16, so 16 is not a number that I'm interested in, the state of Ohio is represented by the number 39 here. So now that I have two data sets, one that is basically all the states, and the other is the census data that I received from the first request, and it comes with the state as a numerical value. I want to combine these two data sets, or merge them together into a single data set that I could work with. This is a very common task that you'll find yourself needing to do in almost all of your data analysis projects. You'll get different data sets that you need to correlate, merge them together by the means of, this ID. It's kind of like a join from SQL essentially. I have this table, I have this other table, I want to merge them together using this foreign key in between. So what I'll need to do here is very simple. Actually, Pandas makes that very easy. So I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to call this my full census data. And what that would be is pd merge, and I'm going to merge my left one here would be my census data, and the second is my states, and I want to merge on basically the column that's called state. So if I look at both my data sets here, they both match on the column name. If that wasn't the case and you had two different names for the same thing, you may want to do a rename of the column name first until you have them match. That way you can use that merge function from Pandas. So again, I am merging census data and states on the column that is called state. And once I have that, let me just do another head request here so to show you what I get. And here we go. I merged these two data sets. The state is basically where they both met or they both can merge together. So what if I want to clean up my data set a little bit more by dropping this extra column, the state column, and have only the name of the state, and obviously I would also need to rename that so it's called state instead of just name. So the first thing I'm gonna need to do is I'm gonna drop that state column. So to do that, I'm gonna do full census data dot drop, and here I'm gonna provide columns, and this is basically the array of the column names that I need to drop, and in that case it's only the state. So if I run this, here I have my new data set does not have that column anymore. So the only thing left to do is to rename that into state. I believe it was full census data that rename, and in here I need to provide a mapping of what I need to rename. So I'm gonna basically say my name needs to be state. I'm calling it all in caps just so it's consistent with everything that I had and to make sure that it's not the same state that I had from before. Let's run and see if that worked. Looks like it didn't, and actually it looks like this also didn't work, and it looks like what I need to do here is to actually save the result of that first call back into the full census data. And so let's actually make sure that that worked. If I call full census data.head and scroll up, here we go. So looks like it worked this time. Now let's do the renaming, and also seems that I missed the columns property. I need to indicate that what I'm trying to rename here are the columns. That's because in Pandas, technically you could also rename the indices that you have for the rows. So let's run this. And looks like it also didn't work, and it's for the same reason, so I just need to save the result of my renaming back into the variable. So let's try it one more time, and here we go. It worked this time. Now let me show you another example here of another API that's available through the API Hub Rapid API. I'm not gonna go through all the coding. I'm actually just gonna paste it right in here. Now one thing you will notice when you work with the Rapid API is that it requires that you send some API secret key along with your request in the header. You notice like the only difference that I have here is that instead of my predicates I have, well, it's the same, it's just called request params, and I also needed to provide the headers object in my request. So these are the headers that I needed to send for that particular request. One of those headers items is a key that is supposedly a secret key that I should not be posting in my code. Otherwise, if you share that code with somebody else, they can just impersonate you. Depending on how sensitive that API is, they could do some malicious things with the secret that they have. So what I want to show you here is how you can actually secure those keys in a configuration file, something that you would not post in your notebooks or in your code when you share it with somebody else. So it would just be your code. They can see the results in the notebook, but you do not really see the secrets that you have. So to do that, what we're gonna do is that we're gonna use the environment variables of your system to store those secrets, and then in our code what we'll do here is I'm gonna import OS, so this is my operating system, and for my key instead of this over here I'm just gonna call OS get env and the name of the environment variable. So in that case I'm just gonna call it rapid API key. And in that case, if I have an environment variable, if I do echo, let me just clear this up. If I do echo my rapid API key, if I have that stored in my computer, I should get something. However, it looks like I did not get anything back. So what I'll need to do is to run export rapid key. Let's just call it rapid API key, and I need to set the value to whatever the actual key is. However, the problem with this is that I'm not really saving it into my computer setting. It's only for this particular session. If I turn off my computer and turn it on again, I would not get the same key again, or this key would be gone. So what I'll need to do is actually save that into my whole computer's environment variables, which is not ideal because I may be working on multiple projects. Maybe both of them, they have the same key name. So I have rapid API key for project 1, which is different from rapid API key for project 2. So what I would need to do instead is that I'm gonna create a file. I will call this the .env file. In that file, this is where I'm gonna save the value of my rapid key. So I'm gonna say my rapid key equals, and here is the value for it. Now my code is still gonna be looking for the entire operating system's environment variable for it to be able to see it. So because I'm using it in a separate file, I'll need to install a separate package. This package is called .env. So I'm gonna do pip env install .env, and over here, while that's installing, I'm gonna import from .env import load.env. So right over here, I'm gonna call load.env, and because I may be updating the values in my .env file here, generally a practice that I normally would do is to set the override value to true. That way, if I change the value here and I rerun this cell again, basically I'm instructing my code to go fetch the most recent updates to that file, and that's the one that it will be using. So let me actually print the value that we get from rapid API key, this variable here, and let me comment everything else, because right now I'm just really trying to demo that particular bit. So if I run that, no module named .env. Oh, looks like it failed installing my package. Let's see what happened. Oh, I actually realized the name of the package is supposed to be python-.env. However, when you're importing it in your code, you still import it by the name of just .env here. So now it's trying to install it. Alright, successful install. So if I go over here and I run the cell one more time, and here we go, I get the value that I saved in my .env. If I change that to some other value, save that, because I have the override set to true, it will get the new updated value, and now here we go, I get the another value. So I'm gonna pause the video for a second so I can actually put the actual secret API key, and I'll be back. Alright, now that I'm back, let me actually make sure that I remove this from here so you do not see that now. If I uncomment everything else, if I run this cell one more time, here we go, we get some data back. One thing that I forgot to mention when I talked about the .env file is that you want to make sure that this file is included in your .ignore file here. That way Git ignores it when it's trying to do any commits or push it or pushes to GitHub. So the secrets that you have in that file are only going to be on your computer. You're never pushing those to a public place like GitHub. Generally, GitHub will actually scan your code, and if it finds any secrets in the code, it will send you an email, mentioning that this is a security hazard or a security risk that you're doing right there. So you want to make sure that, again, you go back and update your .ignore file to include the .env. That way your secrets remain on your computer, not on GitHub. Alright, so that's all I have for requesting data through an API. Just to recap what we've done, we've used the requests library. Depending on the particular API that you're trying to work with, they may request certain elements to be provided in your requests. So for example, the census one, we only needed to provide two parameters, which were the get and the for. And the get essentially was just the variables that we needed. The for is what states do we want to get this data for. We took this data, we composed it into a data frame using the from records, and that was step number one. Step number two, we sent another request to the same API, and that one was just to get the IDs of the different states. Once I got the IDs for the different states, we used the Pandas merge function to basically compose a new data frame that merges both data sets together. And then I dropped the that extra column that I had, and then we renamed the other column that we had, and that was example one. Example number two was just to demo the fact that in cases where you need to use some secret API or secret key, you can create a separate file. You call it the .env, but for that you need to install a library called python-.env, and you'd use that so it gets the values from this file as if it was defined at the operating system level. Now that I have the correct API key, I can compose my request, and you send that request over here, you get back your data, and that's all I have for this video.